Ryan had completed his morning briefing with the other rangers at the northern station, collecting his assignments for the day's patrol. He was a 15-year veteran of the Park Service, a man whose weathered face and quiet demeanor commanded respect among both colleagues and visitors. His route that afternoon would take him through the more remote sections of the Northern Trail, a pathway that wound through dense forest and rocky terrain, passing through areas where cell phone reception became spotty at best. Ryan preferred these solitary patrols. There was something meditative about walking the same trails, understanding the subtle shifts in the forest ecosystem, noticing when something did not belong. It was approximately 3 o'clock in the afternoon when Ryan spotted the backpack. He had been walking for nearly 6 hours, and his legs carried him with the practiced ease of someone who had made this journey hundreds of times before. The backpack was sitting upright on a large boulder beside the trail, deliberately placed in a position that suggested intentionality rather than abandonment. It was not weathered or overgrown with moss. It was clean, recent. Ryan approached it with caution, his ranger instincts immediately registering that something was out of place. The backpack was a quality hiking model, the kind purchased from an outdoor retailer. When Ryan opened it carefully, he discovered items that painted a picture of a planned day hike. There was a water bottle, nearly full, a half-eaten sandwich wrapped in plastic, fresh enough that he could smell the turkey and Swiss cheese, a lightweight rain jacket, folded neatly, a trail map of the park, marked with a route that extended only another 2 miles beyond this location. And there was a journal, leather-bound and new. Ryan opened the journal with methodical care, as someone trained in preserving potential evidence would. The handwriting inside was neat, almost meticulous, belonging to someone who had taken the time to document their experience. The earlier entries were dated from 3 days prior, chronicling the hikers' arrival in the area, their excitement about exploring the Northern Territories, their plans to complete the marked trail by evening. The most recent entry was dated that same day, written in the early morning hours before the hike began. Ryan read the final words written in the journal, and they caused him to pause. The entry stated, "Something is following me. I heard it at dawn, something large moving through the trees behind the cabin. I did not see it, but I heard the sound of heavy footfalls breaking branches. When I called out, the sound stopped. Now there is only silence, but the silence is worse than the sounds. I am going to hike the trail anyway. I need to know that I am not losing my mind. I need to know that the forest is still a place where rational people can walk without fear. This journal will record everything I see and hear. If something happens to me, at least there will be evidence that I was not imagining things." That was the last entry. Ryan radio called dispatch to report his discovery. Within 40 minutes, a search and rescue team had arrived at the location. They began an immediate systematic search of the surrounding forest, expanding their grid in ever-widening circles from where the backpack had been found. Ryan accompanied them, providing context and guidance through the terrain. Hours passed. The sun began its descent toward the horizon. The search team called for reinforcements, bringing in dogs trained for locating human remains or missing persons. The dogs became agitated at a point approximately 300 meters from where the backpack was discovered. They led the handlers to a small clearing where the ground was disturbed, showing signs of something heavy having moved through the undergrowth. But there was no body. There was no blood. There were no torn pieces of clothing or signs of struggle. What they did find was a single boot, lying on the pathway behind where Ryan stood when the dogs first became alert. The boot was laced, positioned as if someone had removed it while standing and placed it carefully on the ground. The search continued into the evening and extended into the following day. Park rangers from 3 different districts joined the effort. Bloodhound teams were brought in. A helicopter equipped with thermal imaging swept the forest canopy. The missing hiker was never found. No body was recovered. No remains were discovered. It was as if the person had simply ceased to exist, leaving behind only the backpack, the journal with its final cryptic entry, and one solitary boot positioned with precision on a forest pathway. Ryan completed his written report that evening, documenting every detail of his discovery and the subsequent search efforts. The case was filed as an open missing persons investigation. The hiker was eventually declared legally dead after the appropriate waiting period, though many questions remained unanswered. Ryan returned to his normal patrol schedule, but something had shifted within him. He found himself thinking about the final journal entry, about the hiker's conviction that something was following them through the forest. 3 weeks later, Ryan made a decision that would lead him down a troubling path of investigation. He accessed the park's archived records, pulling files from missing persons cases dating back over the past 2 decades. He was searching for patterns, for any indication that what had happened on that northern trail was not an isolated incident. What he discovered disturbed him profoundly. The first case dated back to 1999. A hiker had disappeared from the northern trail, leaving behind a backpack with personal belongings and a journal. The journal contained similar entries expressing concern about being followed or watched. The hiker was never found. The case remained unsolved. Ryan pulled the next file. 2005. Another missing hiker from the northern trail. Another backpack with journal. Another final entry about something following through the forest. Another unsolved case. And then another. 2008, 2011, 2013, 2016. 7 cases spanning 17 years. 7 hikers who had disappeared from the same general area of the park. 7 backpacks recovered with journals inside. 7 final entries that spoke of being followed by something that the hikers could hear but not see. Something that moved through the forest with an intelligence and purpose that suggested more than animal behavior. And yet, 7 cases that had been filed separately, investigated individually, with no connections drawn between them by previous investigators. No one had thought to examine the journals closely. No one had noticed the pattern. Ryan compiled all of the journals and spread them across his dining room table at home. He began reading each one in chronological order, creating a timeline not just of the disappearances, but of the behavioral patterns described in the final entries. The entity, creature, or whatever was present in the northern forest seemed to follow a predictable pattern. It would make its presence known to the hiker in the early morning hours before the hike began. It would allow the hiker to proceed with their planned trail, remaining at a distance but making its presence audible. Then, at a specific point on the trail, marked on each hiker's map in nearly identical locations, the pursuit would intensify. The journals described a moment of acceleration, where the sound of the creature moving through the forest would grow louder and closer. Several hikers had written about turning to run, about moving quickly down the trail in panic. Others had written about standing their ground, about attempting to face whatever was following them. In every single case, that was where the journal entry ended. No final words, no explanation, no indication of what had occurred in those final moments. Just blank pages that followed. Ryan became obsessed with understanding the pattern. He began spending his off days hiking the northern trail himself, staying vigilant for any signs of unusual animal activity or behavioral indicators that might explain the disappearances. He interviewed park rangers who had worked in the area during previous decades. He spoke with visitors who had completed the trail and returned safely. He reviewed weather records, trying to identify if there was any seasonal or atmospheric component to the disappearances. What he found was that the disappearances occurred irregularly, not tied to any particular season or weather pattern. They seemed almost random in their timing, separated by years at times. But the geographical location remained consistent. The same section of the northern trail, the same kilometer marker range where the trails diverged and the forest became denser and more remote. The same pattern of hikers disappearing without trace. Ryan began to experience symptoms that concerned him. He started having trouble sleeping, his mind replaying the details of the cases repeatedly. He became irritable with his colleagues. He started missing social gatherings that he had previously enjoyed. His entire world narrowed to focus exclusively on solving the mystery of the 7 missing hikers and whatever force had claimed them. One afternoon, while Ryan was alone in the ranger station filing paperwork, his supervisor approached him and asked to speak privately. The supervisor expressed concern about Ryan's mental state and his recent behavior. Colleagues had noticed that he seemed distressed. He had been asking unusual questions about archived cases. He had been spending extraordinary amounts of time researching information that seemed unrelated to his current duties. The supervisor suggested that Ryan consider taking some time off, perhaps speaking with a counselor or mental health professional. Ryan felt frustration at this suggestion. He wanted to tell his supervisor about the pattern he had discovered, about the 7 disappearances and the remarkable connections between them. But he sensed, even as the words formed in his mind, that his supervisor would not take him seriously. He would be seen as paranoid or obsessive. So Ryan agreed to take a week of vacation time, though he had no intention of resting. Instead, during that week, Ryan conducted an unauthorized expedition into the northern forest. He followed the exact route marked in each of the 7 missing hikers' trail maps. He brought equipment with him, including a high-powered flashlight, a satellite communication device, recording equipment, and a personal locator beacon. He was determined to either find evidence of what had happened to the missing hikers or to encounter whatever phenomenon had claimed them. Ryan walked the trail over 2 days, retracing the paths described in the journals. He reached the kilometer marker where, according to the journals, the creature began its pursuit. Ryan continued forward, waiting for something to occur. Hours passed. The forest remained silent, except for the normal sounds of wildlife and wind through trees. As evening approached on the 2nd day, Ryan made camp approximately where he believed the final encounters had taken place. That night, Ryan sat alone in the darkness, recording his observations into his satellite device. He described the forest around him, the sounds he heard, the feelings he experienced. He noted the time, the temperature, the direction of the wind. He documented everything with scientific precision. He also documented his growing sense of dread and unease, the way the forest seemed to press in around him, the way his rational mind kept insisting that he was alone, even as some deeper instinct told him otherwise. What occurred during that night remained unclear, even in Ryan's own recounting. His satellite logs became fragmented. His voice recordings became incoherent. There were periods of silence lasting hours, followed by Ryan whispering observations so quietly that they were barely audible. When morning came, Ryan emerged from the forest and returned to civilization. He did not file an official report about his unauthorized expedition. He did not discuss what had happened during that night with his colleagues or supervisor. He did return to work after his vacation, but something fundamental had changed within him. He was quieter. more reserved. He no longer asked questions about the missing persons cases. When colleagues asked him directly about his expedition, he would simply state that he had experienced nothing unusual. However, Ryan did do one thing before he resigned from his position 6 months later. He carefully organized all of the journal entries from the 7 missing hikers and placed them in a secure envelope. He sealed the envelope and wrote a note on the outside stating that if anything ever happened to him, this envelope should be opened and the contents reviewed by someone in a position to investigate the Northern Trail further. He left the envelope with a trusted colleague, along with a brief verbal explanation that there was a pattern to the disappearances that he believed warranted serious investigation. To this day, the 7 missing hikers have never been found. The Northern Trail continues to be used by visitors, and the park rangers continue their patrols without awareness of what may be watching from the darker sections of forest. No official investigation has ever been launched into the pattern of disappearances or the connections between the cases that Ryan so meticulously documented. The envelope containing the journals remains in the possession of Ryan's former colleague, though it has never been opened or acted upon. The Park Service maintains its official position that the disappearances are unrelated incidents, isolated tragedies that unfortunately occur when individuals venture into remote wilderness areas. And Ryan, who left his position in the Park Service and moved to a different state, has never returned to the forest. He does not discuss what he experienced during that night in the woods. He does not offer theories about what happened. He remains silent, as if rendered incapable of explaining what he had learned in that dark forest, where civilization ends and something else entirely begins.